Hey, everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And we are on episode 75, which I never thought we'd get to. So very cool for me. Not, better than 50, but not quite as good as 100, but 75. So very happy about that. So thanks to all of you for listening and watching and supporting the show the past year or so. So I'm going to do something interesting for me this week. It's just combining two of my loves, Bigfoot and Gettysburg. So when you hear Bigfoot, you don't normally think of Gettysburg. When you think of Gettysburg, you don't normally think of Bigfoot, but there is a connection. And a few years ago, we go there like twice every year or so if we can. I mean, some years it's only been once a year, but we try to go a lot. We haven't made it yet this year. We went back in April. But after the pandemic, I went to Gettysburg and I found this kind of cool shirt, social distancing, Gettysburg. And, it's in the town of Gettysburg. And I also have another shirt that I've worn on the show before, and I'm going to grab it here. It's this cool tie-dye, like Bigfoot, and my camera's not cooperating. But on the back, from historic Gettysburg. So, at the time, I didn't really make any connection between Bigfoot and Gettysburg. Gettysburg is really known for its hauntings, its ghost stories, and I've done a couple of episodes on Gettysburg ghost stories, and I will link to them in the description below so you can go find those episodes. Really cool stuff, a lot of cool, spooky ghost stories surrounding Gettysburg. So I love Gettysburg, but it's not something I'd ever really associate with Bigfoot. Anyone who's familiar with Gettysburg knows that it's a small town, very sort of dense town. People live there. It's not like New York City or anything, but it's a populated town, a tourist town. There's a lot of ghost hunting businesses along some of the streets there, Steinway Avenue, but you don't really think of Bigfoot. A lot of ghost stories. So you have the town, but you also have the battlefield, and the battlefield has really been kept as close as possible as it was during the battle, and it was all farmland. So there are little pockets of, I guess you could say, forest or woods here or there, but there's nothing really thick enough to really make anybody think Bigfoot is there. They have plenty of deer. We've seen deer sign there and some hunting blinds and tree stands and things like that deeper in the woods when we've gone exploring, but not really anything enough to really hide a Bigfoot, you would think. They do have black bear there, and there have been some recent sightings of black bear near Big Round Top and some other places. I think one was even actually on Baltimore Street. I think it climbed up a tree and they couldn't get it down. It must have climbed up there like in the early morning hours when it was still kind of dark, and then it got light out and people started coming out and it was afraid to come down. So they had to tranquilize it and let it come out of the tree. So where there's bear and deer, there are usually Bigfoot, but I'm a little kind of on the fence about this. So I'm going to read 5 stories today from the Bigfoot Researchers Organization database, BFRO, as I've done in the past. And these are some, cool stories. And again, it just blends Bigfoot and Gettysburg, which I love. Again, take from this what you will. There are pockets outside of town that are much more heavily wooded. So these are not reports in Gettysburg. Like I can't imagine anyone ever seeing a Bigfoot on the battlefield. I can't imagine any animal would be that stupid to just be out in the open, especially something that's supposed to be an intelligent primate. So it's wide open spaces. You have the wheat field, you have Pickett's Charge, you have, I mean, it's clear land. There's not really anywhere for a big primate to hide. You have Big Round Top, you have Little Round Top, but there's tons of hikers, there's tons of tourists going through these places. I can't imagine anything 8 feet tall hiding, but in the surrounding areas of Gettysburg, definitely. I mean, it does get wild. There are some real thick forests there, thick woods, not forests. But I can believe that maybe there is something lurking in the woods of Pennsylvania, just outside of Gettysburg, not within Gettysburg. So let's get to our stories this week. Okay, so I'm going to go in order of oldest to newest. So this report took place in the summer, July of 1961. It was actually on July 1st, which was actually July 1st is the day that the Gettysburg battle started. It was July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So anniversary of the start. So this says possible encounter between a juvenile and a human child near Gettysburg. So this was in Adams County, where Gettysburg is. Location details: Greenmount Fire Hall, south of Gettysburg on Route 15. Nearest town is Gettysburg, and the nearest road is Old Route 15 Lincoln Highway. I've mentioned in the last episode the Cashtown Inn. So the Cashtown Inn is actually on Old Route 15 Lincoln Highway. So if you go outside of Gettysburg and follow Route 15, you will hit the Cashtown Inn, and that's kind of where the Confederate troops came into town. They followed Old Route 15, which I don't even know if it was called that back then, but it was just this road that led to Gettysburg. So, and like I said, as you get out there, it definitely does start getting a little bit more rural and thicker woods. So let me read this account. Observed. I've lived in Adams County, Pennsylvania all of my life, except for 4 years in the U.S. Navy and 4 years in college. I read in the Gettysburg Times tonight about your search team that is coming to Adams County. Take my story for what it's worth. So I'm guessing he's referencing Finding Bigfoot, because the BFRO, the site that I'm on here, is run by Matt Moneymaker, and everybody knows Matt Moneymaker was on Finding Bigfoot, and that was kind of his show with Cliff Barrickman and Bobo and Renee. So I'm guessing he kind of reached out after he heard they were coming to the town and maybe wanted to be involved in the town meeting that they used to have on that show, which was my favorite part of the show. I didn't care about the second half of those episodes. It was kind of just the first half, hearing people's personal stories. I just loved hearing that aspect of it. So he continues, on Thursday nights, I would go with my mother to play bingo at the Greenmount Fife Hall on Route 15 south of Gettysburg. And I don't know if he means the Fire Hall. Fire Hall. That's a typo right there. So not Fife Hall, Fire Hall. I was about 13 years old, which would have been the summer of 1961. There were other kids there, and we would play hide and go seek and do all the fun stuff kids did back then. Playing bingo wasn't one of them. The fire hall held shooting matches and constructed a target box in the lot behind the fire hall. I hid behind this target box during a hide and go seek game. I remember that it was dark, perhaps 10 p.m., and the area was dimly lit by the outside lights at the fire hall. I was backing around the corner of the target box and backed into a big animal. I turned to see what it was and saw this human-like figure, a little over 5 feet tall, not really heavy, covered with hair, not like a bear, but long like hair on the hooves of Clydesdale horses. I remember the odor as being a musk scent, like that of sweat, or a deer-like musk, very strong. I took off running as fast as I could to go tell the others. They or nobody else believed me, and when we went back to see if anything was really there, we found nothing. I often thought of that event, but convinced myself that a Sasquatch would not be found in a populated area such as this. Maybe I am wrong. Also noticed, there was nothing around the target box when I got there because I ran around the thing, seeing where I could hide. Whatever it was, it came almost like a ghost and left the same way. No other witnesses, no other stories. Timing conditions, he says, is about 10:30, dim light, warm. Environment: Marsh Creek lies to the north about a quarter mile or less. The fire hall was in an open area back to the west with a heavy cedar woods. So we go by Marsh Creek all the time when we're down in Gettysburg. And again, he even says he didn't think a Sasquatch would be in this area. It is not heavily populated like New York City or any big city like that, but there's a lot of little houses there and clear land. So if something did spook this guy, it was dark. It could have come out of the woods and maybe he was snooping around garbage cans looking for some food or peeking in windows. Who knows? But he mentions the musky scent, like sweat or like a deer, like an animal sort of smell. The hair long like the hooves on a Clydesdale, like not like a bear. Bear have, everybody knows what a black bear looks like, and Clydesdale have like that more wispy, longer hair. So more like hair rather than fur, which is a bear kind of has fur. So certain things about this tell me it may have been a bear. It could have been a very hungry bear, a mangy bear. It could have been standing up. And again, he's a kid. He's 10 years old. 13 years old. He's outside at night. It's dark and this thing spooks him. And he probably didn't get a very long look at this thing. He saw it and he ran. So maybe a Sasquatch, maybe not, but interesting story that, again, out there, people kind of know what deer and bear and all the wildlife out there looks like. So he's 13. He's kind of at that age where he's not quite a kid. He's not quite a young adult yet. So I give him a little bit more credence than, say, a 10-year-old, but who knows? This could have been a bear. Let me know what you guys think down below, and I will read, see if there's any follow-up here. So the follow-up investigation was done by Paul Mateja. Spoke to the witness by telephone. Not much can be added to the account as much time has gone by. The witness had only a brief glimpse of the animal before running away. He was very terrified and could not talk for a while after. He does distinctly remember its long hair and the musky smell of it, something like cow manure and deer musk. So there again, you hear the smell, the deer musk, manure. A lot of people describe Sasquatch as smelling like a dead animal or something from like the garbage dump. Sulfur smell, which can smell like manure. So just not really pleasant smells. So again, it could have been a bear, but he is saying it had long hair, like that of a Clydesdale's hooves, like this long wispy hair. So who knows? Interesting report, but I thought this one was pretty cool. Okay, so for the second report, this is footsteps heard on porch, large dark shadow passes window near Gettysburg again. So this happened, again, looks like he doesn't remember, they don't remember the year, 1992, 93. Season was summer in June, Adams County. So location details. My parents don't really want this information given out. Sorry, guys, if it were up to me, I'd release it to you, no problem. So yeah, a lot of people don't want Bigfoot hunters just tromping on their land. So I get that. Observed. I never said anything of this to my parents or relatives, but I had talked of this to my friends. I live in Maryland, but my relatives own a cabin in Pennsylvania, around Gettysburg, I believe, and I was about 7 or 10 years old. I can't recall. I'm 17 now, and I was asleep in one of the rooms that's close to the front door of this cabin. The cabin is located semi-deep into the woods on this mountain that I would climb and hike upon regularly. The cabin is pretty old. It has 3 floors. A long driveway goes up to this cabin, and there's a there's a flight of stairs one must go up to reach the front door on the front porch. It's about a 15-foot drop if you were to go off of this porch. Anyways, I was trying to fall asleep, and everyone else was asleep that was staying that night, and it was about 10 p.m., I guess, when I heard a few stomps outside of my window. The porch makes noise as it is an old cabin, but these stomps were pretty heavy and sounded as if whatever was making the noises were feet dragging. Naturally, as young as I was, and knowing the fact that everyone that was going to be staying with us was there and already sleeping, I guess he meant, I was quite frightened. I made no sounds, but I sat up in my bed and looked at the window, which had a curtain over it, so it was impossible to see clearly what was out there. The moonlight shined directly to that window, however, so if something were to pass by, I would see it, and pass by something did. Slowly, kind of just slumping along, was this shadow stomping by my window. I'd say it was about 5 to 6.5 feet tall, with a fairly large head and very broad shoulders. Immediately after witnessing this, at my young age, I retreated under my blanket and fell asleep with fear. The next morning, I went out to the porch to investigate. Towards the end of the porch, which was where the window was that I had seen the shadow pass by, was a very large footprint that was clearly visible. It was visible because surrounding it, making it apparent, was dirt and a bit of grass. But the odd thing about that was that the porch was insanely clean. My grandfather is a clean freak. Needless to say, this event has stuck with me. Also noticed, no, nothing else was heard. Only one witness, him, the other, or her, I doesn't say. Others were asleep, but I showed them the footprint the next morning. No other stories that they know of. Time and conditions around 10 p.m. So the follow-up investigation really reveals nothing here by Ron B. The area around Gettysburg has a history of reports. Track was not cast or photographed. So again, this was a few years ago. This is another teenager reporting this. So don't know what to make of this one. There's some things on this that just make me wonder. The height of the creature, he's estimating between 5 to 6.5 feet tall. So that could be a person. It could have just been somebody walking on their porch. It could have been a drunk. I don't, think many break-ins happen there or trespassing happens out in cabins like this. I mean, you're likely to get shot. But again, if it was a drunk, if it was a vagrant, it could have just been somebody like that. It could have been someone in the family who just got up in the middle of the night and went out for a smoke or went out just to get some fresh air. Because this witness says, I never said anything of this to my parents or relatives. So he never really mentioned it to anybody. So if he did, and he never went to investigate. So if they had, somebody could have said, "Oh, that was me. I went out last night to get some air or to have a smoke or whatever." So not the best sort of story here because we can't really tell what this is. It was just something walking on the porch. And again, it could have been a bear, it could have been a person, it could have been someone in the family. So who knows? Okay, story number three. We are in 1997, again, June, Adams County, Pennsylvania. Location details. The incident occurred in Mishaw State Forest. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Adams County in the state of Pennsylvania. This incident occurred at the beginning of June, just before dusk, just off of Route 233 North, 7 miles north of Route 30. Observed. I was sitting on my deck having a cold one, and I heard the loudest howl, similar to one of the howler monkeys, but the strength of this howl was absolutely phenomenal. As I said before, the strength and duration was hard for me to fathom. There were two of these great howls, and they were moving south and away from my house, which sits around 1,400 feet above sea level. I myself can create a loud and powerful scream, but I had nothing on what I heard that June evening. There was no way it could have been a cougar or a bear. I've fished and camped for some 20 odd years and have never experienced the power of this howl I heard in June of 1997. Other witnesses. I was the only witness, and I was sitting on my deck just before dusk in early June. The environment. The forest top of a ridge, 1,800 feet, pine trees, as well as other types of trees associated with the Pennsylvania mountains. There's no follow up here, so I'll just give my thoughts on this. Again, hard to say. There was a scream. He doesn't really describe the screams. This is kind of like a howler monkey, very loud, louder than he thinks he could make a scream. So that, in its own way, is interesting to me. There's no way it could have been a cougar or a bear. Again, I fished and camped for some 20 odd years and have never experienced the power of this howl. So you have someone who lives in this environment, is an outdoorsman, fished, camped, so probably familiar with the sounds of the forest. And again, if you've heard a fisher, if you've heard a fox, I mean, you spend enough time in the woods, you're going to hear these things, and they can be disturbing because they can sound like a baby crying or a woman screaming. But he's saying this sounded like howler monkeys, and it just reminds me of what I heard in upstate New York. So, which again was not complete isolated wilderness like deep in the Adirondacks, but was very similar, to like Gettysburg, that small town feel. And there were woods behind where we were staying, but I heard howls very much like that, like monkeys or apes, gorillas, just very deep and then very high pitched, but super loud, like not an owl, not anything that a small animal would create. So again, a very sort of ambiguous report. It's interesting. He's hearing this howl, but we don't know what it could have been. He didn't see anything. He's just saying he heard this howl. So very cool. And we will move on. All right. Story number 4. Bow hunter encounters multiple creatures chasing deer. So let us get into this one. This was in the fall of 1997. Adams County. Again, Mishaw State Forest near Ticktock and Pine Ridge Lane. Observed. I live in a fairly remote part of Adams County, Pennsylvania, and the event in question occurred near my house in the Mishaw State Forest near Ticktock and Pine Ridge Lane. The forest here is mainly white pines and oak. It is at a high elevation, and there is enormous amounts of mountain laurel and high rhododendron. On this morning, I awoke for a morning bow hunt. When I left my house to walk the half mile or so to an area I had seen some deer sign previously, I noticed that the weather was going to be perfect. There wasn't any wind at all, and it was cool, so the ground was crunchy. While walking to my stand in the dark, I got maybe 200 yards from my stand, and I heard this noise that scared the hell out of me. It was sort of like a howl. I had never heard anything like it before in my life. I tried to rationalize it as a wild dog or coyote and continued on. A short while later, I was 25 feet up in my stand watching the woods around me as lightness came, shortly after daybreak. I heard several deer crashing through the laurel towards me. I readied my bow, and 4 does came running within 15 yards. They appeared to be spooked by something. A couple of minutes, or so it seemed, later, I heard more crunching coming towards me. I again got myself ready in case a buck was following. The noise that was approaching was kind of strange. It sounded more deliberate as it closed in. I saw several flashes of brown hair through the thick laurel, and then I saw it. It was no deer. It was a bipedal creature about 7 to 8 feet tall. As it ran by me, it never stopped. I noticed it had matted hair all over it. By this point, I had nearly blank a brick. Then I heard more sounds coming toward me. Two more Bigfoots were approaching very fast. These ones stopped, and I got a fairly good look at them. One appeared to be substantially smaller than the first one, and it was dragging a baby Bigfoot along with it. These also fled the area very quickly, and it seemed as though they were following the largest one. After all Sasquatchian activity ceased, I sat in my seat and checked my pants. I was scared to death. I also noticed the Bigfoots left a foul, garbage-like odor behind. Finally, I gathered myself enough to get down the tree and back home. I have not returned to the spot since I had the multiple Bigfoot encounter. Since that event, I have seen other evidence of Sasquatchian activity there. I like that he made up this word, Sasquatchian. Sounds very Renaissance, sort of Middle English, Sasquatchian. I think this area is full of Bigfoots. All right, so this one is interesting. It's different than the other ones we've talked about because he's actually seeing something, lots of detail. He sees this first Bigfoot, 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in matted hair. So he seems to have gotten a good look at it. He mentions that it was light out. He had seen these deer. He had seen the buck chasing the deer, and then he sees this bipedal creature chasing the deer, and he gets scared. He sees this thing, and then he sees two more, both smaller than the first one, it sounds like, but one substantially smaller. So, I'm sorry, substantially smaller than the first one, and it was dragging a baby Bigfoot. So both of these were much smaller. Fled the area very quickly. So this is interesting, and I question these because now it's, is a Bigfoot going to take a juvenile and a baby, or a female and a baby, on a hunt for deer? Possibly. I mean, maybe it's teaching them how to track deer and chase deer. I don't know. But he says he was scared. He says he got a good look at these things. So it's a little different than the other reports, in that he had seen something. It's not just hearing something or seeing something kind of go past a curtain on a window, where it could have been a person, it could have been anything else. He gets a good long look at this. So let's see about the follow-up. There is no follow-up here. And again, I don't know why there's no follow-up for some of these stories. Sometimes it'll mention, but sometimes I think maybe these people submit the report and don't leave contact information, or they haven't gotten to the report yet. This one was submitted in 1999. So I would hope that in 24 years, they would have gotten to this person if they had left any contact info. So I'm guessing there's just no contact info for this particular report. But it's interesting. He did see something. So, and he did hear something. He heard a howl, and it was in the same Mishaw State Forest. So let me know what you guys think about this one. Okay, our fifth and final story comes from the year 1998. This was in the winter. The exact date's not known. They say probably January. Adams County. So the location is Gettysburg along Route 116 between Gettysburg and Fairfield. So nearest road is Route 116. Nearest town is Gettysburg. Observed. The sighting occurred a while ago, so long that I am not sure of the year, but I would guess January or February of 1998. The reason I am reporting it now is because I was watching the History Channel, and the animal they displayed was very similar, with a few exceptions. The hair was even over the body. The History Channel display was baggy at the ankles and narrow at the knees. The eyes were definitely very red. The time of the incident was approximately 1 a.m. in the morning. The importance is the animal was no more than 150 feet from me, and I stopped the car, and the animal and I stared at each other for quite a long time until I got tired and left the scene. Details. My wife and I were returning home from a friend's home in Gettysburg. So again, not in Gettysburg, but, it's got a connection. Along Route 116 between Gettysburg and Fairfield. In front of my headlights, I saw this animal step over a fence and walk across the road, west to east. The animal stopped in the middle of the field and looked back at the car, and I stopped the car to observe. The reason this was not reported sooner is because we did not know how to report the event, and until reading your webpage, I did not realize how prevalent the sightings are. So I'm going to stop there for a second, because I think that's an interesting and important detail to point out, that there are all these Bigfoot reports, but how many of them just go unreported? How many times do people see things and are just afraid to report it, or they just don't know where to report it to? They're not going to go to the police. They may not want to tell friends. They may not want to tell other local authorities, either out of fear of ridicule or fear of just like, what are the police going to do? You can tell I saw a Bigfoot, but what are they going to do? And if you are not aware, if you're not into the Bigfoot phenomenon, if you don't know that there's a place like the BFRO to go and report these things, or that there's tons of podcasts out there that you can tell your story to, especially back then, these stories just go unreported. So for every story you hear out there, you got to figure there's many, many more that just don't ever get told, except around campfires or late at night in the kitchen, to friends, to family members, and just never make it into the public domain here, that we can be aware of it and know of these stories. So I do appreciate when people do share their stories, but very interesting. So this does sound like a road crossing. Stepped out in front of the headlights, stepped over a fence to walk across the road. So I think, the eyes were red. And I think it's interesting that he's talking about the History Channel. I don't know what he's talking about. I guess at the time, this may have been something that was running on the History Channel regularly. They have these, documentaries would come out and they would play them repeatedly for a while. So I don't know which show he's talking about, but he's sort of correcting what the Discovery Channel was showing. And this is something that I've had my buddy Scott on the show a bunch of times, and we've talked about the Patterson-Gimlin footage and just how even Hollywood, even special effects experts and CGI experts, they can't really duplicate what was found in the Patterson-Gimlin footage. It just looks fake whenever they try to do it. But that footage looks strikingly real. And I'm not saying it is real. I don't know. I was not there. But it looks much better from 1968 than what we can do today in 2023, almost 2024. So I think it's interesting that he's pointing that out, that the History Channel sort of got that wrong, because a lot of people will say, yeah, what you see in the movies, what you see on TV, what you see in these recreations never quite looks like what people saw. It's just, they can tell this is clearly a recreation. They can clearly tell it's an actor in a suit versus what they saw as a real animal, a real living, breathing animal. It doesn't have the perfectly, straight hair, and a lot of these things, people will report injuries. They'll report the matted hair. They'll report patches of hair missing. They'll report different colors. It's not always just this dark brown or black hair. So I think those are just interesting details to pay attention to. Again, I'm not saying this guy definitely saw a Bigfoot. I don't know, but I just wanted to stop and point that out, that I think it's interesting that if he never kind of stumbled upon this website, we may never have known about this story. So let me continue. Two witnesses, him and his wife. This was at 1 a.m, moonlight, very clear, along the highway in an open fields. And that's another thing. So down by Gettysburg, again, there's patches of woods and there's patches of open fields. So it's interesting that they saw this in an open field. But it was at night. It was 1 a.m. So if these things are going to move around, they're going to do it at night. So let me talk about the follow-up investigation by BFRO investigator Jim Osborne. I talked to both of the witnesses. The man stated that the creature was at least 7 to 8 feet tall as it easily stepped over a 4 to 5 foot fence, then crossed the road in only 2 or 3 steps. He felt the color was dark brown or black, and the hair was not overly long. The female witness, however, remembered the hair color as reddish, and she felt that the hair length was longish. Neither could come up with exactly how long they sat and stared at the creature. The man also stated that it was very peculiar how the eyes were a very visible red, even when the car headlights were not shining into them when the creature was standing in the field. So let me break this down a little bit. One, witness testimony can differ. Two people can see the same thing, and they're both going to pick up different details, and they're both going to miss different details, and they're both going to see things slightly differently. Again, especially when it's like something startling and traumatic, the brain picks a couple of things and it remembers that, and your perception of what was seen may be different than the person sitting next to you. So I don't think there's huge discrepancies here. I mean, he's saying the color was a dark brown or black, and she said it was more reddish. Again, that could have just been how the lights reflected off the creature. And if you think about it, sometimes you go into a store, you go into the store with your wife or your husband, and you say, what color is this to you? And is this more reddish or bluish? And, the woman might think it's more reddish, and the husband might say, oh, it's more purple. So even when we can examine things, our perceptions, our eyes see things a little differently. So what's, reddish to you might be more of a brown to someone else, or vice versa. So I'm not too concerned about that. It's not like he was saying this is dark brown and she's saying it was white. Then I'd be like, okay, they saw something very different. The length of the hair, um, not overly long versus longish. What does that mean? Again, I don't know if the witnesses were spoken to individually, because not overly long could just mean 5 inches. He's saying, yeah, it's long, but not overly long. And if she's saying it was longish, 5 inches might be longish, because if she's thinking a bear with kind of this neat close fur, then 5 inches might be longish for her. So tough to say. Neither could come up with exactly how long they sat and stared at the creature. Again, like, you hear this a lot in these sorts of witness reports, that time kind of stands still, and you could look at something for 2 seconds and it feels like 5 minutes. And when you're thinking back on it, it's like, oh, I must have looked at this thing for 10 minutes. And it really wasn't. It's just a couple of seconds. But when you're scared like that, time can dilate, time can feel, long amounts of time can feel very quick. Like when you're in a car crash, like it could just feel, a split second can feel like an hour, or vice versa. Sometimes an hour can just go by in a second. Uh, the eye shine is interesting to me. The man said that was very peculiar, how the eyes were a very visible red. So you may have noticed this when you drive. Sometimes your headlights don't have to be directly shining onto a reflective sign for it to reflect. You'll see the reflective sign long before your headlights appear to hit it. But when something is reflective like that, it takes the light and kind of reflects it and amplifies it. So again, I'm not looking too deeply into that. It's interesting that it was red eyes, but a lot of people report red eyes on a Bigfoot, or orange eyes, or yellow eyes. But there's a lot of reports with the eye shine, and it seems like they both saw something large and humanoid run across the road at night and stepped over a fence. And again, Scott and I talked about this on one of our very first shows. I think it was like episode 5 and 6. We talked about road crossings, and why Bigfoot seemed to do this. It's 1 a.m. How many people are driving down the back roads of Pennsylvania at 1 a.m, where this thing, if it sees headlights coming, why doesn't it just wait until the car passes and then cross the road? Why does it run out and almost get hit and clearly get seen? I'm not sure. Mystery for the ages, but very cool stuff here. And I just thought it was interesting to kind of tie in some Gettysburg spookiness with cryptozoology, because again, you don't really think of Bigfoot being near Gettysburg. You think of ghost stories, you think of hauntings, you think of, phantom soldiers and phantom cannon fire, and you're not really thinking Bigfoot. But some people say that Bigfoot is around Gettysburg. So hope you guys like this one. I'm keeping this one short. Again, just very tired from the weekend. I'm recording this on Monday. I have to edit this and get it out tomorrow. It's just been a very busy holiday weekend. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I'm thankful for all of you. And until next week, everybody, rock and roll.